Welcome to Off the Record News. I'm your host, Diana Longrie. Thank you for tuning in. Off the Record News is brought to you live from the SCC studios out of White Bear Lake. And through a cooperative agreement, this program is also simultaneously broadcast to those studios out of the Roseville viewing area, the CTV studios. As a result of this cooperative effort, this program reaches out to and serves approximately 28 communities in the Northeast metropolitan area. And today is October 24th, 2012, and so I encourage you to call in with any questions or comments that you may have either for myself or my guest this evening. We do rebroadcast the program at other dates and times and at other public access studios. So if you're watching on a date other than October 24th, well, please don't call in because we won't be here to answer your questions. However, I will encourage you to either contact me on Facebook, or we will also be giving contact information throughout the show where you can contact my guest should you have questions for her or about the organization. And for those of you who have watched this program for the many years that we've been on, you probably will recognize Michelle Gross. She's been on here a couple of other times before. She is with Communities United Against Police Brutality, and she has a wealth of information this evening, and it's been far too long since we've had her on the program. So with that, Michelle, I want to thank you very much for coming on Off the Record News tonight.
Well, thank you, Diana, for having me tonight. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Glad to be here.
Yes, and for our viewers, tell them first a little bit about yourself. You know, who's Michelle Gross? And how did you get involved in the organization, a little bit about the organization?
I'd be delighted to. Well, first of all, I should tell you that Communities United Against Police Brutality has been around for about 12 years. We are an all-volunteer organization, which a lot of people are very surprised to hear because we offer a lot of services and a lot of assistance to people, including things like a 24-hour hotline, and yet we have managed to do this with all volunteers. And so that's, I think a pretty good indication of the kinds of hard work that we do as an organization. I have been involved with the organization from the start because I'm one of the founders. I've been involved in issues around, just trying to do good work in the community, social justice work, and particularly had a lot of interest in policing and the criminal justice system for quite a long time now, over 20 years. Back in the year 2000, in the Twin Cities and all across the country, every year, I should tell you, for the last 17 years, there's been a National Day of Protest Against Police Brutality. And we have had one of those in the Twin Cities every year for the last 17 years. Back in 2000, we had one of those marches. It was in downtown Minneapolis, and it was quite large. One of the gentlemen who spoke in the march was a man named Charles Abuka Sanders. And sadly, we opened the paper 8 days later on November 1st to learn that he had been shot 37 times by the Minneapolis police, unarmed, in the alleyway behind his home. This was a really upsetting situation for the community. The justification, so-called, for shooting him was that he was, quote-unquote, driving erratically. He'd been up all night taking care of one of his patients. He was a personal care attendant for terminally ill people. And he'd been up all night taking care of one of his patients and was driving the car home to bring it to his wife so his wife could take the kids to school. And because he was so-called driving erratically, he was, really slaughtered in his alleyway behind his home. Many witnesses, because it was, in the morning when people are going off to work and such. And this was very upsetting to the community. So people started coming together to demand justice for Abuka Sanders. And along the way, as people, and I was part of that organizing, along the way, I got to thinking about, the way we organize on this issue is wrong. We should not wait until something bad happens and then pull people together. What it means is that we weren't, we would have to reinvent the wheel every time something bad happened. It also meant that we weren't organizing to address the sort of day-to-day issues that lead to the bigger issues. And so based on my thinking about what was going on, I pulled together 3 friends of mine, and the 4 of us started the organization. So it's been going strong, for 12 years now.
And I know from my own perspective, and at various times organizing groups of people to come together to work on an issue or try to bring about change in a community, that it always seems to be easier to get folks interested and involved when something has happened,
Yes.
or when it's already kind of almost too late to bring about change because the wheels have already been put in place, and trying to stop the wheels from churning is nearly impossible. But that seems to be the time when it's easiest to get people involved, when it's really too late, and trying to get people to get involved proactively before something has happened, or in anticipation of creating a longer public policy change. That always seems to be much more difficult. And the fact that you have accomplished that, and that the organization is all volunteer, I mean, that is a tremendous hurdle for any organization to overcome.
Well, I think it's part of our success is that we are what we call constituent-led. That is, someone calls our hotline and says, you know, I've been brutalized, something bad has happened to me, you know, I need a lawyer and things like that. And we do provide a lot of advocacy and services for people, such as, you know, lawyer referrals, going to court with people, helping them document their cases, helping them obtain film footage if it's, you know, if there's a business or city camera that might have captured something. You know, all of those kinds of things are things that we do. But what we tell people is, you know, they'll call the hotline and say, well, I want a lawyer referral. And we say, great, come to our meeting on Saturday and you'll get one. Because we're not social services, we're social justice.
Right.
And when they come, people will be asked to get engaged in other people's cases, because we'll say to that person, you know, Susie over here is going to court on next week. You ought to go with Susie so that you can learn how the court system works, so that when you go for your case, you'll understand it better.
Right.
And so we get people involved. We kind of hook them in that way. And then they like what they see. They become involved. And so literally every person that's an officer or board member with our organization is somebody who has dealt with the effects of police brutality. And so it brings an authenticity to the group. It brings a diversity to the group that I think is very, very important.
And I think another thing that what you've described, what it does, is it empowers them and gives them permission and an expectation of being involved in what is going on, not just in their case, but in other people's cases, so that they're helping and, you know, themselves, but they're also helping other people, and it's a cooperative community affair.
Absolutely. And you know what you just said is exceedingly important. Many people, when they've been, you know, brutalized or had mistreatment by the police, feel very disempowered. Sometimes they lose their jobs as a result. Sometimes they have, you know, charges put on them that they need to go and address. They may even lose their housing. It's a very deeply, you know, disempowering experience. And in some cases, people develop terrible fears, you know, even post-traumatic stress disorder from the kinds of things that they experience. And so to try to get, you know, you can't just go up to somebody that's in that place and say, okay, now join the movement, you know. You need to say, give people a little bit of help here, but also let them know that a lot of the help is self-help. That is, the more that you involve yourself in empowering yourself to take on this issue, the more you're going to regain your power. And people have universally told us that it's the right mix, it's the right formula, and it really, really works.
And I think the other side of the coin as well, and you and I talked about this before the program, is helping people to understand what their rights are.
Absolutely.
So that way then they can you know, avoid maybe some of these issues down the road if they know what their rights are as well.
Yes.
Or that they're in a better position if something does happen to them.
That's exactly right. And I was telling you before the show about an effort that we made, that we did on Monday. Monday, October 22nd, was the National Day of Protest Against Police Brutality. And traditionally we have had a march, as I said before, but this year we decided to do something very different. Our students, and we do work with a number of student interns, our students built what we call a rights mobile. It's like a cart that's got, you know, placards with the rights on the sides of it and so forth. It's a rolling cart. We took it downtown and we wheeled it around, and during rush hours, morning and afternoon rush hours, as well as during the daytime at the homeless shelters and other places, and we wheeled it from place to place and had little games, and people learned their rights by talking to us. And it was great fun. People loved it. We just had hordes of people hanging around us all day long. As we taught people their rights, we put stickers on them that said, I learned my rights today. And downtown Minneapolis was a sea of these stickers. It was just great. And people just had a lot of fun fun. We figured that we trained well over 510 people or so in their rights, and this is really a way to make it so that people interact safely with the police, so the police feel safer, the people feel safer, and they know what their rights are and what they do and don't have to do, and how they can advocate for themselves. It was awesome.
That's great.
Yes.
Now I understand we have a caller on the line.
Great.
So keep your thoughts about those rights, but let's get our caller on the line and find out what kind of questions and comments they have, and then we'll come back to that. Thank you for waiting. Questions, comments?
Michelle, thanks for your good work on this issue of police brutality. It's huge.
Thank you.
What I've noticed is, I think you're right, you have to do more education because all the kids are trained in school that cops are their buddies. And I've noticed that kids like to play cat and chase with cops as if they're playing a game. So thanks for doing that education that they got to be aware. What I want to know is why aren't the court systems dealing with all these bad cops? In St. Paul yesterday, the cop shot 2 people.
Yes.
The problem that's coming, there's a lot of good cops, but you got to look at each cop now as being potentially a bad cop because it's so dangerous out there. How are we going to address this? Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. I love what you just said because it gives me a chance to talk about a couple of really important thoughts. First of all, I want to kind of explain that when we think about policing, we actually don't think about individual cops in our organization. I mean, we do, of course, recognize that individual police officers engage in different conduct. But a lot of people say, well, isn't it just a few bad apples? It's not really bad apples, it's a bad system. And the reason it's a bad system is because the conduct of the police who do engage in misconduct is condoned, it's supported, and those police officers who do not want to be part of it are not supported in stepping forward or even not being involved. I mean, they're not supported. In fact, sometimes they're ostracized by the other officers. The chiefs allow that to go on. So that says not that there's a few problem cops, but there's a problem system. And I think that the caller made a very good point about the court system validating some of that conduct. Some of it is that, frankly, they just work closely together. The police officers know the court officers and the judges. A lot of times the judges rely on those officers for their safety. They're very cozy, and they work closely together. And the familiarity of it makes you less likely to challenge when you think someone is lying or has engaged in misconduct to even arrest the person or whatever the case may be. But
I think that you've made a good point in that there's the potential for cozy relationships.
Yes.
And simply because of that, there should be more attention paid to keeping the integrity of those relationships and understanding where the lines are.
Yes.
And understanding perceptions of the public. Because if you don't have the integrity as number one for your policing system and for your court system and for your judicial overall umbrella of everything, if you don't maintain that integrity, then the public looks at it as something that is not serving them and something that they cannot trust.
That's right. It seems like a closed system that is self-perpetuating. One of the things, and this is a little bit far afield from what we were talking about before, but I do think it's important, is that judges should not accept endorsements from police federations and police unions. It does imply a real coziness. That means that the public is not going to get fair treatment. A lot of people really see it that way. And, we can't tell the unions that they can't endorse, but we can definitely tell the judges that you shouldn't accept the endorsement.
Well, and I think you could even go another step further, like say when you have county prosecutors running,
yes.
Your county attorney running for office, perhaps they should also likewise not be taking endorsements from policing.
Well, absolutely,
unions.
and the measure of how well a prosecutor does should not be how many convictions they get. It should be whether we learned the truth in a particular matter, not whether the person went to prison. There's an awful lot of innocent people sitting in prisons these days. This has been validated by a number of studies. And factually innocent people.
Well, I know even from my own perspective, being an attorney and generally a defense attorney in is general practice, but the little bit of criminal defense work that I do, I come across numerous people where they don't have the money to really defend. They are not guilty, but to go through the process of trying to exonerate themselves, they maybe don't have the money for it, they don't have the time, they don't understand the process, and they're wondering to themselves, well, really, what does a misdemeanor mean to me anyway? It's no big deal, when in reality, now they've been convicted for something that they really didn't do, so then later on, if something again comes up, you know, they're always going to have to explain, oh, I really wasn't guilty. Oh, no, you were. You got
a deal, you know.
You took the deal. That's right.
I know. We really try to encourage people not to go there because they don't understand the employment ramifications, housing ramifications. You know, there are a lot of things that happen to people when they take these deals. A lot of times you should be asking yourself, why would they offer me such a good deal, you know, because a lot of those good deals aren't really, really good deals after all.
Yeah, exactly. Now, going back to what you were doing the other day to educate folks on their rights.
Yes.
What were some of the rights that the people that you were interacting with, that they were most surprised to find that they had, that they were really glad that they found out about?
It was great. We asked people 3 simple questions. We were using a little game to do this, and people just loved it. The first question was, you know, you're walking down the street and a police officer approaches you and says, I'd like to see some ID. Could you show me some ID? Do you need to show your ID? So I'm going to ask you that question, and you tell me the answer.
No.
That's correct. You do not have to show your ID in the state of Minnesota. That's not consistent state by state, so you do need to know your state laws. But if you live here, you need to know that you do not have to show an ID. But you can't just say no, you know, see a cop or whatever. You know, if you look like you have an attitude or you look like you're going to be rude or something like that, it's not going to go well for you. What you should do instead is you should say, am I being detained or am I free to go? And if the officer says you are not being detained, then you should just leave. You say, well, okay, well, I'm leaving now. You know, do not show an ID. One of the things that's important for people to understand is that you never have to assist the police officers in investigating you, and you shouldn't. You know, some people say, well, I don't have anything to hide, but you know what? You don't know. Maybe somebody with a similar name is being looked for. Maybe someone who looks a little bit like you is something that's being looked at because somebody ran out of a building after a theft or something. You know, you don't know what they're looking for, and you shouldn't assist them to investigate you because you don't know what they're looking for.
Right. And you also don't know if somebody has made some allegations against you. You don't know who they are.
Correct.
You don't know what those allegations are. And they could very well be false allegations, and having, you know, again, being in general practice, some of it in family law, there have been occasions where somebody has made a false allegation against the other party because it might help them in their custody battle.
That's right.
And you just don't know. And it's better not to offer more than what you must.
That's always right. Now, second question on the little contest was, you're driving down the street and you are pulled over by an officer. Of course, we know that you have to show your ID because you have to have a valid driver's license, and that's normal. But then the officer says to you, you don't have anything to hide, do you? You don't mind if I search your car? What would you say?
No.
Okay, no is correct. You don't.
But I don't know the right words to
say.
Right,
but I'm going to give you the right words to say because you don't want to just say no. What you want to say is clearly and loudly, you want to say, I do not consent to this search. The reason you want to be clear is because if you say no, did you mean no that you don't have anything to hide, or no that you don't mind if they search? So you want to make it very clear what you're saying. So you want to say, I do not consent to this search. Police cars these days have video and audio. They will capture that if you say it clearly enough. Then if the police officer searches your car anyway, you shouldn't try to stop them because then you could have more problems for doing that, including you could be brutalized. So don't try to stop them, but if they claim to find something, then whatever they find is not admissible in court because you didn't consent to that search and that made it an illegal search. So they can't bring those things into court unless they happen to be in plain view. You know, if they go digging under your seats and claim they find something, then it's not admissible in court, and you know that makes it easier for your lawyer to defend you. So we always want you to do those things on the front end that make you more defensible later.
And I think it's important for citizens out there to realize that nearly all the law enforcement vehicles out there are equipped with audio, video, because if there is an incident where you're pulled over, it is important to be very clear in what you say.
That's right.
Because it's being recorded, because that may be the very thing that will help protect you as that citizen. And here's a good example. Is not necessarily somebody being pulled over for a drug bust,
right?
But an incident where they were driving by and they thought that the school bus was just stopped, not realizing it had a stop arm.
Oh, it had the flag out, yeah.
Yes. And they drove by, but there just happened to be the police car there too. Well,
well, it happens like that, doesn't it?
It does, it does. But the charges were not only driving by the school bus with the arm out,
right,
but while there were children present, which elevated it up to a gross misdemeanor.
Oh my.
And if originally it started out just with the arm out, but then the police officer later on amended it to include while children were present to elevate the charges to gross misdemeanor. Well, the first thing that I thought of, I wonder if they have some audio from their car.
Great.
And wouldn't you know, they did. And you could see from the police audio and video, you could see my client's car driving by, but you could also see the bus with the stop arm, and you could see where there had been children present, but their feet underneath the bus had left the ground and were in the bus already.
Oh my.
And then you see my client's car driving by. So there were no children present.
So you see how important those kinds of things are?
Very, very important. Very important. And so that was very instrumental in getting a good resolution.
Good.
But a lot of times people don't realize there are these tools to look at, and that they have that right that if they find themselves charged with some kind of a violation that where there's a patrol car somewhere in the vicinity, they're part of this interaction, that they have the right under discovery to get that audio and that video to be able to see exactly what is there, because they may actually find it's to their benefit.
That's right. And you know, one of the things that we do is help people preserve that video and audio, because you have to act quickly.
Yes.
You know, that stuff doesn't stay for forever. They don't keep all of it for forever. You need to act quickly to preserve it. And so we'll send letters to preservation to get them to hold that video.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Those kinds of things.
And then there was a third question I think that you were asking.
Yes, there were. But before I give you the third question, I'm going to give you the bonus question. And the bonus question is, you've been stopped, you've shown your driver's license. Do the passengers in your vehicle have to show their IDs?
No.
They do not, and you are correct. And part of why we want to enforce that is that the passengers should keep their mouths shut. They should not engage in the traffic stop in any way. They should sit there and be quiet. They should have their doors locked while they're sitting there, and the driver should have the door locked and only lower the window about this much, enough to pass out the driver's license, registration, insurance, and so forth. And further, when they stop, they should put their hands on the steering wheel and tell the officer, I'm going to take my wallet out now, and then reach, because that's for officer safety. We want the officers to feel safe and not feel that somebody's rooting around and trying to get something that might hurt them. Well, you know, it's understandable that they want to feel safe too.
Well, that's right, and that's part of good communication.
Right.
Because it's good for the police officer and it's good for the citizen, either way.
That's right.
Then there's no misunderstanding about where are the hands, what's going on, what's happening.
Right, because, you know, officers are trained to look out for their own safety, rightfully so.
Absolutely.
So we want to, you know, help them out that way. Okay, so now your third question. You're in your home and you hear a knock at the door. Knock, knock, knock. Police, let us in. Do you have to let those officers in?
No.
That's correct. Under the Fourth Amendment, and I know you know this as an attorney, but for our viewers, under the Fourth Amendment, your home has the maximum protection, the maximum privacy, and you should never give that privacy up. If police officers come to your home, you want to say through the door, not opening the door, but through the door, you want to say, do you have a warrant? If they do not have a warrant, they have no right whatsoever to come in your home, and you should never let them in. Because if you let them in, then it becomes a consensual search, and anything they find can be used against you. So you don't open the door, because that in and of itself has at times been perceived as consensual. And so you talk through the door, you say, do you have a warrant? If they say yes, then you say, pass it under the door. You know, or you go out your side door, lock yourself out, and walk around to the front and get the warrant from them. The warrant needs to have your address on it. And we all know there have been many, many wrong address raids. Some of those have resulted in people, you know, being injured or killed. So you want to make sure that it's a warrant with your address on it. And you want to make sure that it was signed by a judge, not rubber stamped, but ink signed by a judge. It is your right to have those things. You never have to let police in your home without that, and you shouldn't.
Exactly. And in another case that I had, somebody had opened up their screen door like only an inch or so, just enough for the police officer to put their foot in the screen door, and that was the mistake.
That's exactly right. So you want to talk to them through your door. Never, ever open your door and let them in, because they will start to inch their way in, and they'll just, next thing you know, they're in your living room, and it's a done deal. The one thing that I mentioned earlier was this thing called the plain view rule. And plain view rule is also something important for people to understand. Anything you have out in plain view that might not be legal or might be questionable in any way, put it away. If they see it in plain view, then that gives them rights to confiscate it, to make charges against you, things like that. You know, we don't encourage people to have contraband, but if you have it, you know, put it where it can't be seen.
And or something that could be misconstrued.
Correct, misconstrued.
You know, and it could be something that's misconstrued, and just simply because of that.
Yeah, maybe
you
a vase that looks like,
water.
you know, a vase that looks like some kind of drug paraphernalia, or could be perceived as something like that, or whatever it is, you know.
Or you came back from China and you've got some fresh tea leaves.
Right. Whatever,
in
you know.
a bag.
Hey, people have gone to jail for things like this. Because that's the way they
sold them to you in China. Right. Well, you know what? That's a true story. So
you
there
know,
you go.
that does happen, you know, exactly. So we don't want to have people, you know, get hemmed up in the system without a good reason. You know, we really want to give people a sense of safety and a sense of empowerment by having them assert their rights. And so we do a lot of that kind of training. That's another sort of piece of our work. So we do advocacy, we do education, and then we do policy and practice work, where we essentially try to change the policies or do other things. You know, sometimes it involves litigation, sometimes it involves lobbying the city council or the state, you know, the legislature, things like that.
And I recall too that a few years back, when Minneapolis was going through the search for a police chief, that your organization actually was involved in helping to interview or to select as part of that process.
Correct.
As the community segment of that police chief search.
Right, and we think that those kinds of things are very important, to be proactive, not just to hang back and wait for things to happen and, you know, yell and scream when they do, but to be proactive in ways that will really try to get at this issue. For example, one of the efforts that we're doing right now is to make a charter amendment in Minneapolis, and I'd like to see this happen in other places too, by the way, but we're going to start with Minneapolis, in which the police officers that work for the city would be required to carry their own professional liability insurance. This is important because in Minneapolis, the police are self-indemnified, or the city is self-indemnified, so that if there's a lawsuit and it's successful and there's some kind of a payout from that lawsuit, that comes right from the city's coffers, meaning from the taxpayers. And so what we would like to see instead is for the police officers to have professional liability insurance. We even put in there that the city could pay for it. So we're not saying to make them pay more money. We're just saying that by having professional liability insurance, if an officer has too many complaints against them, at some point they become uninsurable. And then where the city doesn't have the will to get rid of officers that engage in misconduct, the insurance company sure will. So,
right,
you know.
and I think, again, it gives a little bit more of a vested interest in the day-to-day conduct, and just making sure that you're following good practices.
Exactly. The city, and any cities that have this kind of situation, basically what they do is their so-called risk management strategy, if you will, is to bring false charges against people and hope they stick. Because under a U.S. Supreme Court decision called Heck versus Humphrey, if those false charges stick, then that person no longer has a lawsuit. So they try to just layer some charges on there, get the person to take a deal or to get convicted of these charges, and then that's their whole risk management strategy, rather than addressing these officers that are problematic and that engage in this conduct over and over. You know, we can literally look at a town, any typical town, and there's a percentage of those officers that engage in misconduct. It's generally not most of the officers. It's a certain percentage, usually anywhere from 20 to 25% of the officers that engage in repeat misconduct. You know, so in Minneapolis, there's about 150 officers that have had 5 or more complaints against them. And we know that because we do data practice requests and get the complaints. And so what we find out is, again, it's a group of officers, but because they're not stopped, they're not disciplined, they're, in fact, many times promoted, you know, from this misconduct, it encourages the conduct to continue. And so we need a risk management strategy that'll stop that conduct, because as taxpayers, it's just too darn expensive. We pay out as taxpayers, if in Minneapolis, I'm thinking of those taxpayers, pay out $4.5 million a year in police misconduct settlements and judgments. That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
You know, you could keep a lot of libraries open, you could, you know, build homeless shelters, you could do a lot of really good things with that money. And it shouldn't be going out to pay for people's injuries and things as a result of police misconduct. What we should be trying to do is rein in that misconduct.
Now, I understand that we have another caller on the line.
Great.
Caller, thank you very much for your call-in. Questions or comments for us this evening?
Well, I just had a couple of comments. I'm not sure. I just tuned in. I was late getting on, so I'm kind of disappointed I didn't see the beginning. But it's very interesting so far. I don't know if you covered juvenile crime at all yet. I did have a couple questions regarding that. I think a lot of times people, you know, juveniles are offered deals, and they take deals because they think, and they're told often, that, oh, you're a juvenile, this won't be on a permanent record of any kind, okay? Or your file will be sealed, nobody will ever know. I believe, through the research that I've done, that if you're like 16 or 17, and if you're ever arrested for a felony, you can be tried in adult court. You can have your trial information and conviction are part of a permanent record. And you can also be tried as an adult and sent to an adult prison. You know, and those are 16 and 17-year-olds. That's my understanding from what I've read. So I think that's, you know, people really, it is a big deal. You know, any age crime is not a good thing to be taking part in, but you really need to think of the consequences first. And I think protecting yourself is key. The other thing is, you know, they do use guilt by association to get people to confess to things or make deals that they don't belong making deals on. And if you could touch base on that a little bit, I'd appreciate that. Thank you so much, and it's a great topic. Good job.
Okay, thank you very much for those questions and your comments.
Definitely, and I think it's a great opening to talk about the juvenile crime situation. You know, our organization does not endorse criminality of any kind, but police brutality is also a crime, and that's, you know, a kind of crime that needs to be prevented as well.
Yes.
So, you know, your caller is right that you know, juvenile crime is not a good thing. But what we also have to understand about children is that they are children. You know, the psychology of children is not that they understand long-term consequences. The older they get, they may have some understanding of it, but even kids as late as 18 and 19, which I know most people don't think of as children, do not have the understanding of the long-term consequences of their conduct.
And children also, depending upon their maturity level and just their genetics and whatever else, they develop at different rates.
That's right.
And you could have somebody who's 17 years old, but they don't have the same maturity level as somebody else who's 17. They may have the maturity of a 15-year-old, for all you know.
Exactly. And so consequently, this is a huge issue in this country. What people are referring to is the school to prison pipeline, you know, where kids are basically sort of put into schools where there's a lot of policing that happens in the school, where there's widespread overutilization of detention and things like that, sort of kind of almost like you're getting kids ready for a prison sentence. And these kids, they're not really getting the full measure of education they should get. Their educational needs are being neglected. They may have other needs that are being neglected either in the home or in the school. Certainly nutritional and healthcare needs and other things like that. And then these kids get involved in things and something happens and there's a crime. Treating kids like they're adults and as if they would understand. Basically, you're taking a kid who isn't mature and you're ruling them the whole rest of their life. A felony means you can't get a school loan, so you're not going to get advanced education. You won't be able to go to college. You cannot get, you can't vote. I mean, there's a lot of terrible things that happen as a result of this.
It's very difficult to get a good paying job.
That's right.
And how can they hope to have a bright future if they can't get a good paying job? Because if they ever thought that they might want to have a family or to own a home or any of the other aspirations that you have when you're young, what can you do? If you have this felony on your record, it's going to keep you from having that good paying job most likely.
Exactly. And so here you are, you make a stupid mistake as a kid. And kids make stupid mistakes. If you've ever had kids, they do boneheaded things sometimes. So you've got a kid that made a stupid mistake, and they pay for it with the rest of their lives. That is deeply unfair.
Yeah, and it was interesting that this topic has come up because just the other day I was listening to the debates that were going on here in Ramsey County for Ramsey County Commissioner. And one of the candidates was actually talking about he would like to see more money in the county here in Ramsey actually be put into intervention type of programs for juveniles, so that way, if they do take a wrong turn, we can intervene so we can get them back on the right track so they can be productive adults and move them in that track. Or if they've got a problem with truancy, how do we take care of that right from the get-go? And I thought that's very important because as a county issue, that can have huge ramifications.
Absolutely.
Huge ramifications. So I thought that was very interesting that this candidate came up and was talking about that, and he was really the only person who was in this panel who was talking about that issue at all.
I think it's fantastic. And I don't have the exact figures with me, but I know that for every dollar spent on interventional, actions like that or, programs, you save, I believe it's $4.50 or $5 in what would end up in the criminal justice system later. Because people have to remember, with this kind of lock them up mentality, there's costs associated with that. Prisons is more expensive. It is more expensive to send somebody to prison than it is to send them to college. And that's nuts. We need to be sending people to college, not prison,
Exactly.
and helping folks, have a good rest of their lives. One mistake should not keep a juvenile from, being a productive member of our society and, sort of banish them to poverty for the rest of their lives. And so, I think your caller makes an extremely good point about that. The other kind of piece that she raised is this question of guilt by association. And that brings me to something I'm eager to talk about, which is gangs, gang-related, the Metro Gang Strike Force and some of those kinds of things. It is true that there is an awful lot of crime that's predicated on guilt by association. One thing that happens, for example, is that women who are in relationships and then it turns up later that the person that they were in a relationship with is a drug dealer, let's say, for example, or involved in the drug trade. Oftentimes they will, talk to the man and they will offer him a good deal if he, turns over people that he knows, if he gives up some names and things like that. These women that are involved with these men who don't know anything about what they're doing, who get just mixed up with the wrong guy, have nothing to trade. They can't get a good deal because they have nothing to trade. And oftentimes those women go to prison for longer than the men who are actually engaged in the actions that, that sent that woman to prison. So there are some things about that guilt by association that have serious ramifications. The other thing is this whole question of gangs. And a lot of times people have to understand the definition of a gang is a group of people. basically, that affiliate together. And in this
that
country,
could apply to any group of
yes,
politicians.
Yeah,
Huh?
exactly. There's a whole lot of people that could have that title, you know.
Yeah, those party bosses out there.
Yes, it could, and some of them probably really qualify in more ways than one. But you know, the thing about it is, it's not illegal to associate with people. In fact,
Yes.
you know, our Constitution makes that quite clear, that associating with people is perfectly legal. It's a crime that a person would commit, an actual crime. That should be the thing that sends a person to jail or makes them suspicious or whatever. So if a person engages in a theft or some other crime, you know, then yeah, go after them for that, but not because they associate with other people. And so we have been working on something that I think you're going to be interested in hearing about. We've been involved in dealing with complaints from the Metro Gang Strike Force. The Metro Gang Strike Force was this grouping of people, of law enforcement officers from various agencies around the Twin Cities. I think most of your your viewers have probably known about this, but just because, you know, sometimes I ask and people say, I don't know about it, I'll just give a quick description. These law enforcement agencies work together on this Metro Gang Strike Force, and basically, literally, it was kind of an anything goes situation. Oh, if you think a person looks like they are a gang member, you can stop them. You can steal their cell phone if you want to. You can open their cell phone and look at their contacts without a warrant. You can break down their door and go in their house without a warrant. You can steal their car. You can steal their money. You can do anything you want to do, and you can beat people up.
And they were finding too, isn't this correct, that they were finding that just the threat of that, then they would extract money or jewelry or whatever it was from these people to say, well, you know, then I'm not going to bring any investigation to look into who you are associating with or what you might be doing, as long as you pay us off.
Well, it was a lot of that going on. They would seize people's property, and one of the things that in this country, it's legal to seize property if you can directly tie it to a crime. But you know, they were seizing people's property. There was no indication that that property came from a crime or had anything to do with it. A lot of these people had nothing to do with gangs. Plenty of people, you know, had nothing to do with gangs. And this property all ended up in people's pockets, frankly. You know, large amounts of electronics, at least 18 cars, millions of dollars, you know, were found to have been stolen from people. And the people literally thought they had no recourse. So then, a brave young man by the name of Adrian Ramirez, who at the time was not even a documented citizen, but he lived in a family. Some of the people in the family were documented, some were not. And he lived as part of 3 generations of a family. He stepped forward and looked to try to start a lawsuit because of what had happened to him and his family, including that he had been brutalized severely. He ended up, where he had been kicked and brutalized in his neck, he ended up developing a serious cancer there. And he was a young man, you know, he had everything in front of him. He had a wife and a brand new baby. And he stepped forward to complain about this treatment, and then he ended up testifying before the state legislature. And as a result of his testimony and other people's, the program was shut down. But unfortunately not before the officers who were involved in it went to the headquarters and shredded every piece of documentation of that program. People can Google Metro Gang Strike Force, and they will find a report by former federal U.S. Attorney Thomas Heffelfinger, and another gentleman, Hempel, I believe was the gentleman. At any rate, look that up, and all of the things I'm saying are documented in that report. This is nothing I could make up. You know, millions of dollars disappeared, 18 cars at least, you know, millions of dollars in electronics, jewelry, and other things. Literally, these officers were giving these electronics to their friends as gifts and Christmas gifts to their families and so forth. And these people literally thought they had no recourse. Well, from all of this, Adrian and others stepped forward and developed a class action lawsuit. To be a member of the class, though, you had to have something stolen from you. So all of these people stepped forward and they sued successfully. There was a $3 million settlement in the suit, and the people involved in the suit, you know, the complainants, got about $1 million of those dollars. The other $2 million went to the attorneys, but that's another story. The people got these suits, but again, they only got it if you got anything stolen from you. So you could have your face beat in. I mean, you could be sent to the hospital, and a lot of the people we're dealing with had serious injuries.
So it was basically only property issues.
They didn't want to hear anything about excessive force in this lawsuit for some reason. And so all these people who were injured, if they didn't have a nickel stolen out of their pocket, then they had no recourse. And so we took all of those complaints, and we are working with all of these plaintiffs. And when we started working and looking at all these complaints, it came down to a common denominator. There was one officer, a Brooklyn Park police officer named Greg Burstad, who turned out to be the real, sort of the worst of the bad apples of this whole deal, if you will. He was one of the prime movers of really injuring a lot of people, and seriously, and stealing things from them. And so to know that he wasn't going to have any repercussions for his conduct was not acceptable to us. So we developed all of these complaints against Officer Burstad. And when I say complaints, it wasn't like a one-page piece of paper. It was, all of these were heavily documented, 2 and 3 inches of documentation per complaint. We developed 29 complaints out of this whole thing, and we took them to the Brooklyn Park Police Department about a month and a half ago and said, we demand an investigation. We demand that this officer be suspended. You know, you're going to do this. And so we took them in, and at first they wanted to ignore them for a few weeks. We had a second demonstration in which, you know, hundreds of people show up, land on their doorstep. You know, they're not really used to that at Brooklyn Park.
No, probably not.
You know, and I think it kind of took them by surprise that that many people cared. And they ended up suspending this officer, and now we have been working with them, bringing in witnesses, talking about these injuries and all the things that happened, photographs and all of that stuff. And so we're working actively with them to assist them in their investigation. We also brought those same complaints to the FBI and to the Minnesota Post Board. And the Post Board is a police officers standard and training board, which is basically the board that licenses police officers. And they've been putting pressure on Brooklyn Park to do a good job of an investigation. If they don't do a good job, the Post Board will take over the investigation.
Ah, I see. Mm-hmm.
Yes. One other thing that came up was that in the process of this, we learned that Adrian Ramirez and his family, the Ramirez family, had been dispossessed by this officer. He showed up at their door and basically tackled Adrian to the ground, handcuffed him, took his keys out of his pocket, went into the house. The only person in the that was home at the time was the grandfather. Knocked the grandfather down, stepped on his face, and broke his teeth. You know, this is an elderly gentleman who hadn't committed any crime. They ransacked the house without a warrant, tried to claim later it was a consensual search, found nothing. No one was arrested, nothing was found, and then dispossessed this family, 3 generations of this family, out of their home for 4 days. At the end of the 4 days, and he had changed the locks on their door.
Right, because he locked the door. Right,
he changed the lock on their door.
Wow.
And they couldn't get back in their home. So these are people with brand new babies. They can't get diapers. They don't even have a toothbrush. Their shoes, their clothes, everything is locked up in this house that they can't get back into. Illegally dispossess these people. There's nothing in the Constitution that lets you do that. I'm sorry.
No.
And then he says, I'll meet you Friday at noon. They show up at 11 o'clock on Friday to get back in their home, and they see a truck driving away with every one of their earthly possessions. This happened in Crystal, but it was by this Brooklyn Park police officer. So,
well, see, now that's an interesting issue too.
Yes.
Is that, you know, he's from a different jurisdiction, but it was because he's part of this this Metro gang strike force.
Correct.
That he had that authority to go across the lines.
That's right.
Oh, I see.
That's
Okay.
right. And so then, you know, they make a complaint to Crystal. And, you know, it's a felony theft, so of course Crystal should investigate. Crystal has sat on that investigation for 3.5 years and has refused to move on it. Even the FBI inquired about it, and Crystal did not take any action whatsoever. Finally, the Crystal police investigator who was responsible for the investigation told the attorney of this family that I'm being pressured not to investigate. And it's ridiculous. It is outrageous that all people are entitled to police services. It's a crime in and of itself not to provide those services. And it's especially a crime not to do it because you think the perpetrator is a fellow police officer. That's an outrage. So we took the complaints to Crystal, and when they wouldn't respond to us, wouldn't meet with the family, wouldn't do anything, we showed up at Crystal and had another big demonstration and went into their city council meeting and testified. And, you know, the response of the city council members was, how could you bring this up in public? Why can't you bring this to us in private? Well, listen, Crystal, you've had 3.5 years to get this right. You didn't do it. So now we're all about the transparency. And yes, you do need to, step forward and take care of this business. So now they've started an internal investigation to see why the investigation was suppressed. We've sent a letter to the police chief to demand that the original investigation happen, so at least this family can know something about what happened to their possessions and who did it.
Right, exactly. And again, this is a suburb.
Yes.
And I think generally the perception is that issues of police misconduct or police brutality, it's something that you're going to find in the inner city, you know, where things are tough and hard. You're not going to find it in the suburbs. And yet, I think that if you start looking carefully at the newspaper headlines, and even just looking at newspapers, you will see that there are incidences spread out throughout all of the suburbs, that none of them are exempt from this. And that's why it's an important issue for citizens and law enforcement agencies to be cognizant of what should be done and what can be done to make sure that, well, that we have good enforcement of the laws, but also we don't have people overstepping their bounds.
Absolutely. And one of the issues for people in the suburbs is there are often less resources to address this. But our organization does take up cases in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the surrounding suburbs. So people are very free to contact us, and we will help you figure out how to document your case and how to get some justice.
Well, and that's a great segue, because I know we've probably got some viewers out there who do want to know, how do we get a hold of Michelle or Communities United Against Police Brutality? Well, I'll give you a moment to grab your pen and find a piece of paper, and we're going to give this contact information a couple times before the end of the program here. But first of all, the website address is www.cuapb.org. And then the phone number is 612-874-7867. And we'll give that information to you again in a little while here too. So, and I think it should be noted that while, you know, you initially started in Hennepin County, and that's where you are basically headquartered out of, that, you know, you're looking at issues broader than just Hennepin County, correct?
Definitely. We need to, because this is not an issue that's, you know, just sort of segregated to Hennepin County. We look at all the counties, we, you know, in the surrounding suburbs, because again, people come to us from all over the place looking for that help. And many times in some of the, you know, the first ring and second ring suburbs, they have even less resources. In Minneapolis, until recently, people could complain to a Minneapolis Civilian Review Authority. Now, unfortunately, the city has shut that down, which is
really?
shameful.
I didn't know that.
We could do just about a whole show about that, because they did it with the community in great protest, but they did it anyway. And that's just another whole long story. But until recently, people could complain to a Civilian Review Authority. And in St. Paul, you can now complain to a Civilian Review Authority, but in the surrounding suburbs, you have to go to the police to complain about the police, typically, or more safely, you can come to us and we will help you. So this group of these 39 people that we were working with, that came down to 29 complaints that we developed and submitted. We basically worked with the people, got their permission, their written permission to represent them in these complaints, and then when we filed the complaints, we filed them with our address and our phone number. And if these officers, you know, want to interview people, they need to come through us, and we're arranging those interviews in churches and other places where people feel safe.
And I think that presents a more neutral ground.
Correct.
From which to be able to either do a better investigation of what that complaint was, or to try to find that social justice.
Exactly. And so we are also watching carefully to understand, you know, whether they're doing an adequate investigation or not. You know, if in one case, one of the officers that was involved in this Brooklyn Park incident or situation, basically sort of tried to belittle one of the people that was being interviewed, and we didn't allow that. You know, we're not going to allow you to abuse someone who's here to bring you information that you need.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to be intimidating those folks who are trying to, well, who probably feel uncomfortable as it is to step forward and bring up issues that they feel need to be heard. It's you know, kind of nerve-wracking all by itself, just making that decision.
Yes.
Because I know people that I've known in the past where they have maybe had that you know, where they've had a situation where they felt like they wanted to step forward, they were afraid of retaliation, or they were afraid that maybe if they had some complaint, then that they needed to ask for services in their neighborhood, in their community for their protection,
Yes.
that they would be ignored. So there's two different ways of retaliation. One is that something is actually done to you. That's one type of retaliation.
Yes.
But there's another type of retaliation where services are withheld when you need them for your protection.
Correct.
And that is a type of retaliation that oftentimes people don't think of that as a way that you can be retaliated against.
Yes, and we've actually documented a number of incidents of either of those types of retaliation, you know, the actual overt retaliation or the failure to provide services as a form of retaliation, you know, when people have gone to the police. And so consequently, working with us, we will give you more power to go over. You're not doing this by yourself. You're not facing it alone. We can help you know what your rights are. We can go there with you and things like that. And we often do things like that to help people secure their rights.
And in our last 5 minutes here, again, I want to give the contact information, and then I know you do have training from time to time as well, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that. But the contact information, once again, the website, www.cuapb.org, and the phone number 612-874-7867.
Yes, and you're right. We do lots of trainings. We teach people how to, again, know their rights. We also teach people how to document police behavior. We run a program that we call Cop Watch, and Cop Watch involves bringing out cameras into the community, teaching people in their neighborhoods and in other areas to just, you know, be out and safely document. You don't get right in the face of the police officers and they don't feel unsafe, you know, but how to stay a safe distance and still document, and to create film of police encounters that can be used in court. And so we do a lot of that kind of thing. We also teach people how to do what's called court watch. You know, when the first caller mentioned something about the court system and some of the issues with that, we teach people how to go in and observe the judges, observe the prosecutors and the defense attorneys and their conduct, observe the what people call the brown shirts, or the court officers and things like that, to see how people are treated in the court system. And this is not small stuff, because there is some judicial misconduct that goes on. You know, we take up that piece as well. Haven't had a lot of time to talk about that, but there are things that go on. And one of our students the other day observed, for example, in her court hearing, that the judge and the prosecutor were laughing and telling a lot of jokes back and forth and things like that, which can imply, and in front of a jury, it implies that the judge and the prosecutor are cozy and that the prosecutor has more sort of credibility. So this could actually damage a jury trial. And so, you know, acting very casual. You know, here's a person that is possibly facing jail time and things like that. This should be a serious matter. You know, treated with the highest level of respect.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
And so those kinds of things. We've seen situations where judges fell asleep.
Oh.
We've seen situations where judges ran off the bench to avoid ruling on something. You know, where they ruled in favor of every prosecution motion and against every defense motion, you know, where there's clear bias and things like that. And those things need to be documented. And so we've been involved in a project of doing that for a very long time. And we teach people how to do that, and anybody can do this. If you can spare any hours during the daytime, this is a great thing for retired folks to do, or people that are just interested students. You know, it's one of the most fascinating things. It sounds like it would be boring, but it's absolutely the opposite. It's, you know,
well,
fabulous.
that's exactly right, and it's all about the integrity of the system.
Yes.
It's not necessarily to finger point at particular individuals. It's about how to make the system better and how to preserve the integrity of the system.
Yes.
And I think that, for me, is probably the most important point out of all of this, is that everybody needs to know what their rights are and be empowered to know what those rights are.
Yes.
But thirdly, after those two things, is that everybody needs to work together to work towards having good integrity to the system, because
Absolutely.
That's important for the people who are, involved in the system to keep it running, as well as those folks who find themselves in the system for whatever reason.
That's right. Just to give you a tiny idea, and I know we're close to being done, but we took the information that we had gathered through some of our court watch and took it to the Judicial Board on Racial Disparities, and basically testified and gave them some ideas of how they could decrease those disparities. And actually they took up a number of our ideas and they're in place now. So yes, we are trying to make things better. It's not just about complaining, it's about working to solve the problems.
That's right. Well, again, I want to thank you, Michelle, for coming on the program. Always a wealth of information. And to our viewers out there, I want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of Off the Record News. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.